"Happy birthday, babe," she whispered, leaning in for a kiss. I could feel the warmth of her lips, the sincerity in her voice. For a fleeting moment, life felt perfect. She had everything planned out, the works. "Tonight's going to be special," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Clara wasn't the type to half-bake anything. If she said it was going to be special, I knew she meant it. She mentioned a surprise dinner, dropping hints that she'd invited a few close friends and some of her coworkers to make the day more memorable. "You'll finally get to meet Adrian," she added casually while pouring syrup over the pancakes. My brow furrowed slightly at the mention of her boss. Adrian. That name had been sprinkled into a few conversations over the past year. Her amazing boss, supportive mentor, lifesaver during stressful deadlines. I'd never met the man, but he seemed to occupy more space in her world than I was comfortable with. Still, it was my birthday, and I wasn't about to let a passing thought ruin it. Clara noticed my hesitation. "Don't worry," she teased, brushing it off. "He's harmless. You'll love him." She spoke so convincingly, I almost believed her. Almost. The day unfolded in predictable but pleasant ways. Calls from family, a few surprise gifts from friends, and Clara occasionally ducking into her phone to confirm last-minute dinner details. It wasn't unusual for her to be meticulous with planning. She thrived on orchestrating perfect moments, and I was grateful for it. But as the hours ticked by, something gnawed at me. A faint unease I couldn't quite put into words. Maybe it was the way Clara seemed more distracted than usual, her phone lighting up with notifications she hurriedly swiped away. Or maybe it was the mention of Adrian. I told myself I was being paranoid, letting jealousy get the better of me. After all, Clara and I had built a marriage based on trust, hadn't we? The highlight of the morning came when Clara handed me an envelope. Inside was a card with the words, "To the love of my life, today and always." It was the kind of card that only Clara could write, heartfelt and personal, reminding me of all the reasons I married her. At the bottom, there was an additional note. "Tonight will be unforgettable." Something about the way she said it lingered in my mind. Was it excitement or guilt in her voice? I shook the thought away. My wife wouldn't do anything to hurt me. As the afternoon rolled on, I found myself pacing the living room, staring out the window, waiting for the evening to arrive. A part of me was eager to celebrate, to toast to another year of life surrounded by the people who mattered. But another part of me, a darker, quieter part, was bracing itself for something I couldn't yet name. In hindsight, maybe my gut was trying to tell me something. Maybe that small voice whispering, "Pay attention," should have been louder. But hindsight's a cruel teacher, isn't it? It shows up after the damage is done, wagging its finger, saying, "I told you so." If only I'd listened. If only I'd trusted that faint unease clawing at my chest. But back then, all I could think about was pancakes, presents, and the promise of an unforgettable night. Turns out, Clara was right. That night was unforgettable, but not in the way I expected. Evening arrived like a grand crescendo, with Clara flitting around the house like a composer fine-tuning her symphony. She was in her element, draped in a red dress that hugged her curves, her hair cascading down her back in waves. She always had a way of owning a room, and tonight was no different. It wasn't just her beauty that struck me, though. It was the way she moved, restless, like an actor rehearsing lines before stepping onto the stage. I let it slide, convincing myself she was just excited. The dinner table was set impeccably, candles flickering against the soft glow of our dining room chandelier. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have her. But luck has a twisted sense of humor. The first guests arrived, a mix of familiar faces and a few new ones. Clara greeted everyone with warmth, effortlessly shifting between roles as host and life of the party. I tried to soak in the joy, but there was a tension I couldn't shake. An invisible thread tying me to something I didn't yet understand. And then he walked in. Adrian, Clara's boss. My gut reaction? He was everything I'd imagined, and worse. Handsome in a polished, too perfect way. His tailored suit fit him like a glove. His smile exuded charm, and his handshake? Firm enough to make you think he could sell you your own house. He greeted Clara with a familiarity that felt too familiar. A hand on her lower back that lingered a beat too long. A laugh that resonated deeper than the joke warranted. My jaw tightened. Clara introduced us, her voice bright. David, this is Adrian. The man I've been telling you about. Adrian extended his hand, his grin wide and confident. The birthday boy. Clara's told me so much about you. You've got yourself a real gem here. His words were friendly, but there was something in the way he said them, a smugness that made my skin crawl. I forced a polite smile, gripping his hand a little harder than necessary. Thanks for coming, I said, my tone neutral. The night unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. Adrian dominated the room, his voice commanding attention as he shared stories that were just a bit too perfect. The kind of stories that make people laugh and admire you, but leave you wondering if they're rehearsed. Clara, seated beside him, was his perfect audience, laughing a little too hard, leaning a little too close. The others didn't seem to notice, or maybe they chose not to, but I saw it. Every glance, every shared smirk. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into casual interactions. But then came the comment that struck like a dagger. One of Clara's friends, a bubbly woman named Linda, leaned over to me and whispered, Adrian's a riot, isn't he? Clara's always going on about how amazing he is. You're lucky she's got such a great mentor. I nodded stiffly, masking the storm brewing inside me. Lucky? Was that what this was supposed to feel like? Lucky to watch another man bask in my wife's attention on my birthday? The evening dragged on, with Adrian weaving himself into every conversation like he was the guest of honor. When dinner was over and the cake was cut, Clara announced she needed to check on something upstairs. She excused herself, and Adrian disappeared a few minutes later. A subtle buzz of unease rang in my ears. I stood there, holding an empty glass, scanning the room. Conversations blurred around me, voices muffled by the pounding of my heart. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that there was more to Clara's absence than checking on something upstairs. The logical part of my brain told me to stay put, to trust her, to not ruin the evening by giving in to irrational jealousy. But logic had taken a backseat by then. I excused myself, my steps cautious as I climbed the staircase. The hallway was quiet, the faint murmur of guests' laughter echoing from downstairs. As I approached the bedroom, I heard muffled voices, Clara's and Adrian's. My stomach tightened. I paused outside the door, my hand hovering over the handle. Part of me wanted to walk away, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But the other part, the louder part, demanded answers. Little did I know, the answers waiting behind that door would unravel everything I thought I knew about my wife and myself. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn around and let ignorance keep its blissful hold. But curiosity, no, suspicion, had already sunk its claws into me. With one deep breath, I pushed the door open. There they were. Adrian's hand cupped Clara's face, his thumb tracing her cheek with the kind of tenderness that wasn't his to give. Clara, my Clara, tilted her head, her lips parting just enough to meet his. It wasn't hurried or accidental. It was deliberate, practiced, as though this wasn't the first time. My heart didn't break in that moment. It shattered, fragments scattering like glass across the floor. The air shifted when they noticed me. Clara froze, her eyes wide with shock, guilt painting her expression. Adrian, on the other hand, had the audacity to smirk, stepping back with an air of nonchalance that made my blood boil. Whoa, easy there, man, Adrian said, raising his hands as if I were the irrational one in this scenario. It's harmless fun. Harmless fun. Those two words hung in the air like a taunt. My vision blurred, and for a moment, the world around me narrowed down to the sight of him standing there, unbothered, in my bedroom. What the hell did you just say? I growled, my voice low and shaking. Clara moved toward me, hands outstretched in a plea. David, it's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like? I barked, cutting her off. What exactly is it then? Because it looks like you're kissing your boss in our bedroom. Adrian chuckled, actually chuckled, as though I were the punchline to a joke only he found funny. Relax, David. No need to make this bigger than it is. We were just messing around. That was it. That smug grin, the dismissive tone. The gall of this man to stand there and act like he hadn't just ripped my world apart. Something inside me snapped. Without thinking, without hesitation, I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and swung it with all the force I could muster. The sound was sickening, glass shattering, the dull thud of metal meeting skull. Adrian crumpled to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Clara screamed, dropping to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the damage. "Are you insane?" she shrieked, her voice breaking. "You could have killed him." I stood there, chest heaving, the lamp still clutched in my hand. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the weight of what I'd done began to sink in. Adrian groaned, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't getting up anytime soon either. Clara looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "David, please, just calm down. We can fix this. It's not what you think. I didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for what to happen, Clara?" I snapped. "For me to catch you? For him to end up bleeding on our bedroom floor? Or for you to betray me on my birthday?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. What could she possibly say that would make any of this better? The silence was deafening, broken only by Adrian's labored breaths as he struggled to sit up. I took a step back, the lamp slipping from my grasp and hitting the floor with a dull thud. My heart raced, a cacophony of anger, betrayal, and disbelief pounding in my chest. I couldn't stay in that room any longer, couldn't stand the sight of Clara hovering over Adrian as though he were the victim. Without another word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. My legs carried me down the stairs, but my mind was a whirlwind of rage and confusion. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. This wasn't how my life was supposed to go. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "This is only the beginning." And it was right. This betrayal was the spark that would ignite a fire I couldn't yet imagine. A fire that would consume everything in its path. I don't remember how I ended up in the bathroom. One minute, I was storming out of the bedroom, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. The next, I was staring at myself in the mirror, gripping the edges of the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. My reflection didn't look like me. It was someone else. A man consumed by rage, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I splashed water on my face, hoping it would wash away the storm brewing inside me, but it only made me feel more suffocated. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of Clara and Adrian flashed before me, like a cruel movie on repeat. Her lips on his smug, dismissive grin. That damned phrase, "It's harmless fun." I wanted to scream, to punch the wall, to tear apart everything in sight. But instead, I just stood there, frozen, my mind racing. How had it come to this? Clara and I had spent years building a life together. A life I thought was solid, unshakable. How long had this been going on? Was it a one-time mistake? Or had I been blind to something that had been festering for months? Years? A knock on the bathroom door pulled me out of my thoughts. It was Clara. "David, please," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to talk. Let me explain." I didn't respond. What could she possibly say to make this better? The truth was already out, staring us both in the face. There was nothing left to explain. But Clara was persistent. "David, I swear, it wasn't what it looked like. He kissed me and I didn't know how to stop it." I finally opened the door, and there she stood, tears streaming down her face, her makeup smudged. She looked devastated, but I couldn't tell if it was because she felt guilty or because she'd been caught. "Save it," I said coldly, brushing past her. When I walked back into the bedroom, Adrian was gone. The blood stain on the floor and the shattered lamp were the only evidence of what had happened. I turned to Clara, my voice sharp. "Where is he?" "I called his driver," she admitted, her hands trembling. "He's taking him to the hospital." "The hospital?" I laughed bitterly. "And what exactly is he going to say when they ask how he ended up with a gash on his head? That I caught him making out with my wife in my bedroom?" Clara flinched at my words, but didn't deny them. "David, please," I panicked. He was bleeding, and I didn't know what else to do. I shook my head, the anger boiling over again. You panicked? You? What about me, Clara? Do you have any idea what you've done? On my birthday, no less. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for this to happen. Didn't mean for what to happen? I snapped. For me to find out? Or for you to get caught? She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. You know what? Don't answer that. I don't want to hear it. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Where are you going? Clara called after me, desperation in her voice. Anywhere but here, I muttered, slamming the door behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Every emotion imaginable coursed through me. Rage, heartbreak, confusion, and a growing sense of humiliation. I couldn't help but replay the events in my head, overanalyzing every detail. How long had Adrian been a part of our lives? How many of those late nights at work were really about work? I stopped at a park, the cool night air doing little to calm the storm inside me. I sat on a bench, staring at the empty playground, and wondered where we'd gone wrong. Clara and I had been happy once, or at least I thought we had. Had I missed the signs? Had I been too trusting? But then, a darker thought crept in. This wasn't just about Clara. This was about Adrian too. The smug arrogance of that man, thinking he could waltz into my life and take what wasn't his. The anger burned hotter. I wasn't just going to sit back and let this slide. Clara's betrayal was one thing, but Adrian? He needed to know that he couldn't mess with my life and walk away unscathed. When I finally returned home, the house was quiet, eerily quiet. Clara was sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn, her hands clasped tightly together. She looked up at me with a mixture of relief and dread, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. I walked past her, heading straight for the bedroom. The sight of the bloodstain on the floor and the shattered remnants of the lamp made my stomach churn. It was a grim reminder of the chaos that had unfolded just hours before. But this wasn't over. Not even close. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from Clara's half-hearted apologies or Adrian's smug excuses. I grabbed my laptop and sat down, determination coursing through me. Clara's phone was sitting on the bedside table, charging, and for a moment, I debated whether to pick it up. She'd given me her passwords years ago, but I'd never felt the need to use them. Trust was the foundation of our marriage, or at least it had been. But tonight, trust was out the window. I unlocked her phone and started scrolling through her messages. At first, everything looked innocent, conversations with friends, family, coworkers. But then I found a thread labeled work. My blood ran cold as I opened it. The messages between Clara and Adrian were sickening. It wasn't just casual texts about meetings and deadlines. There were jokes, compliments, and photos. Selfies of Adrian at his desk, messages like, "Late night again. Wish I could be home, but at least I have you to keep me sane." And Clara responded. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. Flirty emojis, inside jokes, comments that blurred the line between professional and personal. My stomach churned as I read further. Hotel bookings, dinners I didn't know about. One message from Adrian stood out. "You looked stunning last night. Couldn't stop thinking about you." And Clara's response? It felt wrong, but I can't say I regret it. I threw the phone across the bed, disgusted. My hands shook as I logged into Clara's email on my laptop. If there was more, I needed to see it. And there it was, confirmation of what I'd feared. Receipts for restaurants I'd never heard of. Calendar invites labeled meeting, but scheduled at times when Clara was supposed to be home. Then I stumbled upon something that made my blood boil. A folder titled Adrian. Inside were emails from months ago, detailing their first encounter. Adrian had sent Clara a series of emails praising her work, calling her brilliant and indispensable. What started as professional admiration quickly spiraled into something else. Flirty comments, invitations to casual lunches, and eventually, a message that read, "Clara, I think about you more than I should. I know this isn't right, but I can't help how I feel." It wasn't just Clara who had betrayed me. It was Adrian's manipulation, his calculated moves to worm his way into our lives. I read email after email, my anger building with every word. This wasn't some harmless fling. Adrian had used his position, his influence, to blur the boundaries with my wife. And Clara? She had let him. But the worst part? Adrian wasn't new to this game. In the depths of Clara's inbox, I found an email thread between her and a former coworker. The woman warned Clara about Adrian, calling him a predator who preyed on vulnerable employees. Clara had responded defensively, brushing off the warning. Adrian's not like that, she wrote. He's just supportive. You're reading too much into it. I slammed the laptop shut, my head spinning. How could she have been so blind? Or was it willful ignorance? Either way, I wasn't about to let Adrian get away with this. Not after what I'd read. I confronted Clara with the phone in hand, thrusting it toward her. How long has this been going on? I demanded, my voice cold and sharp. She stared at the phone, her face crumpling as tears spilled down her cheeks. David, I didn't mean. Don't you dare say you didn't mean for this to happen, I interrupted. You knew exactly what you were doing. She tried to defend herself, to claim she had been manipulated, but her excuses fell on deaf ears. I wasn't interested in hearing her justify months of deceit. All I cared about now was making sure Adrian paid for what he'd done. Not just to me, but to every other family he destroyed with his reckless behavior. As Clara sobbed on the couch, I walked away, my mind racing. Adrian thought he could waltz into my life, take what wasn't his, and walk away unscathed? Not a chance. This was war, and I intended to win. Adrian had torn my marriage apart and sat smugly in my bedroom as if he owned the world. But he was about to learn that his power, his charm, and his arrogance were no match for a man fueled by betrayal. The first step was to gather every shred of evidence I could find. Clara's emails, text messages, and the receipts I'd uncovered were just the beginning. I needed more proof of Adrian's pattern of manipulation, his exploitation of others. If I was going to take him down, I wanted to make sure it wasn't just personal. I wanted to expose him for what he truly was, a predator hiding behind his corporate title. The next morning, while Clara lingered in the kitchen with red-rimmed eyes and a guilty expression, I left the house without a word. I wasn't in the mood to listen to her apologies or her attempts to justify the unjustifiable. Instead, I drove to the office of a woman I'd contacted late the previous night, a former employee of Adrian's who had warned Clara about him. Her name was Linda, and she agreed to meet me after hearing the urgency in my voice. When I arrived at the small coffee shop where we'd arranged to meet, Linda looked hesitant, her eyes darting around the room as if she expected Adrian to walk in at any moment. "You're Clara's husband, right?" she asked, her voice low. "I am," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "And I need your help." Linda hesitated, glancing at the folder I placed on the table. "I tried to warn her," she murmured, almost to herself. "But Adrian, he's good at what he does. He knows how to make you doubt yourself, make you feel like you're the only one." Her words confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't Adrian's first rodeo. Over the next hour, Linda recounted her experiences with him. The compliments that started innocently enough, the subtle blurring of boundaries, the pressure to stay late for work that often turned into something else. "He never outright forces you," she explained, "but he makes it clear that your career depends on his approval. And if you push back, you're out." By the time Linda finished speaking, my resolve had hardened. Adrian wasn't just a manipulator. He was a predator who thrived on power imbalances, and I was going to bring him down. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly, piecing together a case against him. I contacted other former employees, many of whom had similar stories about Adrian's behavior. Some were hesitant to speak out, fearing retaliation, but others were eager to see him held accountable. With their help, I compiled a damning dossier: emails, texts, testimonies, and more. I even found a few employees who were still at the company and willing to share information anonymously. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances at home. Clara tried to talk to me, to explain her side of the story, but I wasn't ready to hear it. I needed to focus, to channel every ounce of my anger into something productive. Every time I looked at her, I saw Adrian's smug face, and it only fueled my determination. Then came the breakthrough. One of Adrian's former assistants shared a particularly incriminating piece of evidence. A recording of a conversation in which Adrian blatantly admitted to using his position to reward employees who played along with his advances. The recording was the nail in the coffin, the piece that would make it impossible for him to wriggle out of the mess he'd created. But I wasn't just going to expose Adrian in private. No, that would be too easy. He needed to be humiliated, to have his carefully constructed facade shattered in front of everyone who believed in him. I found my opportunity in a company-wide event, a lavish gala that Adrian himself was hosting. The timing couldn't have been better. With the help of a few allies inside the company, I secured access to the event and the presentation system. My plan was simple. I would hijack the presentation and reveal everything in one devastating blow. The night of the gala arrived, and I walked into the venue with a calmness that surprised even me. Adrian was there, basking in the adoration of his colleagues, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Clara wasn't with me. I told her I needed time apart, and for once, she respected my wishes. As the evening progressed, I waited for my moment. When Adrian took the stage to deliver his keynote speech, I slipped away to the AV room. My hands were steady as I uploaded the files to the system, each click bringing me closer to the culmination of my plan. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian's voice boomed over the speakers. Tonight is about celebrating success, innovation, and the incredible team that makes it all possible. With one final click, I activated the presentation. At first, the screen behind Adrian flickered, causing a murmur to ripple through the crowd. He paused mid-sentence, glancing back, clearly irritated. "Looks like we're having a bit of a technical issue," he said with a chuckle, trying to keep the mood light. But it wasn't a technical issue. It was the truth. The first image appeared, a screenshot of an email exchange between Adrian and Clara. The words were damning, their flirtation undeniable. Gasps filled the room as more emails and text messages flashed on the screen, each one painting a clearer picture of Adrian's manipulation and deceit. Adrian's confident facade cracked. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, his voice barely audible over the growing commotion. He turned to the AV team stationed near the stage, barking orders, but they were as stunned as everyone else. Then came the testimonies. Video clips of former employees, their faces blurred for anonymity, recounting their experiences with Adrian. Each story was worse than the last. How he exploited his power, made promises he never intended to keep, and used his position to prey on the vulnerable. The final clip was the recording from his former assistant, where Adrian's own voice betrayed him. It's not coercion if they think they're getting something out of it. Everyone wants a shortcut to success. The room erupted into chaos. People whispered furiously, pointing at Adrian, their admiration turning to disgust. His face turned beet red as he stammered, This is a setup. Someone's trying to sabotage me." I stepped out of the shadows then, making my way toward the stage. The crowd parted as I walked, their eyes shifting between me and the screen. Adrian spotted me, and his expression shifted from confusion to rage. "You," he spat. "You did this." "Damn right I did," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You think you can walk into my life, destroy my marriage, and get away with it? Not this time, Adrian. Not ever." Clara had begged me not to make this public. "You'll ruin us both," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. But standing there, watching Adrian squirm under the weight of his own actions, I felt no sympathy. This wasn't just about me or my marriage. This was about every person he'd ever manipulated, every family he'd ever torn apart. The whispers grew louder as people pieced together the puzzle. Adrian's co-workers, the same ones who had laughed at his jokes and sung his praises, now looked at him like he was a stranger. His wife, seated near the front, sat frozen in shock, her hand covering her mouth. She hadn't known. Of course, she hadn't known. Adrian was too good at hiding his true nature. Security moved toward the stage, but not to protect Adrian. One of the organizers grabbed the microphone and demanded an explanation. Adrian tried to speak, but his words were drowned out by the growing uproar. It didn't take long for someone to call the police. As they escorted Adrian out of the venue, his wife trailing behind in tears, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. I'd won. Adrian's reputation was in shambles, his career in ruins. But the victory felt hollow. The crowd slowly began to disperse, their conversations buzzing with shock and speculation. I stayed for a while, standing near the stage, watching the aftermath unfold. People came up to me, some offering words of support, others simply staring as if I were a spectacle. Clara wasn't there. She hadn't wanted to see this, and honestly, I didn't care. That night, as I drove home, I realized that the war wasn't over, not entirely. Adrian was gone, his empire crumbling, but the cracks in my marriage remained. Clara's betrayal lingered like a wound that refused to heal. And though I'd exposed Adrian for the monster he was, I couldn't help but wonder, was it enough? Or had I sacrificed too much in the process? When I walked back into the house that night, the weight of what I had done clung to me like a heavy coat. The silence inside was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and Clara's quiet sobs from the living room. She was curled up on the couch, her makeup streaked, her eyes swollen from hours of crying. But the sight of her didn't stir any pity in me. Not anymore. She looked up when I entered, her expression a mix of relief and trepidation. "David," she began, her voice hoarse. I didn't respond. I walked past her and poured myself a glass of water, the coolness soothing my parched throat but doing little to calm the storm brewing inside me. When I finally turned to face her, the words came out colder than I expected. "I hope you're happy now." Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered. "I was stupid, David. Don't." I cut her off, my voice sharp. "Don't sit there and tell me you didn't mean for this to happen. You knew exactly what you were doing, Clara. Every text, every email, every late night you spent with him. You chose this." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. I'd spent too long bottling up my anger, pretending everything was fine, while she tore apart the life we'd built together. Now, it was all coming out. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I continued, my voice rising. "You didn't just betray me, you humiliated me. You made a mockery of our marriage. And for what? For him? A man who sees women like you as nothing more than a conquest?" Clara buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said through her tears. "I was lost, David. He made me feel important." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Important?" I repeated, my voice dripping with incredulity. "You needed him to make you feel important? Was I not enough? Was our marriage not enough?" She didn't answer, and that silence was more damning than any words she could have said. I sat down across from her, the anger in my chest giving way to a deep, aching sadness. "Do you even understand what you've lost?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "Because I don't think you do. You didn't just lose me, Clara. You lost the life we built together. The trust, the love, the respect. It's all gone. And you have no one to blame but yourself." For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "I can fix this," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "We can fix this. Please, David, just give me a chance. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the woman I'd fallen in love with was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the lies and the betrayal. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. "I don't know if there's an us left to save," I said finally, standing up. "Right now, all I see when I look at you is him. And I can't live like that." Clara broke down completely, her sobs echoing through the room as I walked away. I went upstairs, shutting the bedroom door behind me and sinking onto the bed. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence deafening. In the days that followed, Clara's downfall became evident. Word of Adrian's public humiliation spread like wildfire, and with it, the details of their affair. Clara's friends, people who had once admired her, began to distance themselves. Neighbors whispered behind her back. Even her co-workers, many of whom had idolized Adrian, looked at her with a mixture of pity and scorn. She tried to salvage her reputation, reaching out to friends and family to explain her side of the story. But the damage was done. Adrian's wife had filed for divorce, and Clara became collateral damage in the fallout. At home, things were no better. I avoided her as much as possible, retreating into myself as I tried to make sense of what my life had become. She begged for forgiveness daily, but her words felt hollow, like echoes in an empty room. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes desperate. "David, I know I've made mistakes," she said, her voice trembling, "but I love you, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you if that's what it takes." I stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "Love?" I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "If this is what your love looks like, Clara, I don't want it." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of guilt. But it was fleeting. She had made her choice, and now she was living with the consequences. I walked away, leaving her alone in the kitchen, her sobs echoing through the empty house. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was the one I had now. And for better or worse, it was time to start picking up the pieces. Without her, life after betrayal isn't something you plan for. It's not like there's a manual titled, "What to do when your wife and her boss destroy your world." No, you just wake up every day, put one foot in front of the other, and hope that somewhere along the way, it starts to hurt a little less. That's what I told myself as I stood in the driveway, watching Clara's car disappear down the road for the last time. She'd finally accepted it was over. There had been weeks of pleading, tears, promises to change, but I couldn't let her stay. I wasn't the same man anymore, and I couldn't pretend we could rebuild something from the ashes she had left behind. The divorce papers sat on the kitchen counter, unsigned but inevitable. In the days that followed, I started to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. Every corner of the house held memories of Clara, her laughter, her touch, her betrayal. So, I stripped it all away. New furniture, fresh paint, anything to erase the traces of her. I told myself it was for the best, that this was the only way to move forward. And for the most part, it worked. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into work, and even started going to the gym again. It wasn't about revenge or proving something to Clara. It was about reclaiming pieces of myself that I'd forgotten existed. Slowly but surely, I felt like I was coming back to life. But there was still a shadow looming over me. Adrian. He was out on bail, and while his career was in ruins, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't done. People like him don't just disappear quietly. They plot, they wait, and they strike when you least expect it. One evening, as I was heading home from work, I noticed a car in my rearview mirror. It was subtle at first, just a black sedan that seemed to be on the same route as me. But when I turned down a side street to grab dinner, it followed. My heart began to race. Was it paranoia? Or was it Adrian? I decided to test it. I took another turn, this one completely out of my way, and sure enough, the car followed. My palms were sweaty as I gripped the steering wheel, adrenaline coursing through me. I wasn't about to lead this person back to my house, so I headed toward a well-lit parking lot, hoping to force a confrontation. As I parked and stepped out of my car, the black sedan pulled in behind me. The headlights went off, and the driver's door opened. My breath caught as a man stepped out, his figure silhouetted against the dim street lights. It wasn't Adrian. "David," the man called, his voice tentative. I squinted, trying to place him. As he stepped closer, I recognized him, one of Adrian's former assistants. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "I need to talk to you," he said, his tone urgent. "It's about Adrian." My stomach sank. "What about him?" "He's been asking questions," the man said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "About you. About your wife. He's obsessed with what happened, and he's not letting it go." I felt a chill run down my spine. Of course, Adrian wasn't going to let it go. He'd lost everything. His job, his reputation, his family, and he blamed me for all of it. "What kind of questions?" I pressed. The man hesitated. "Just be careful, okay? Adrian's not the type to let things lie." As the man got back into his car and drove off, I stood there, my mind racing. This wasn't over. Adrian might have been knocked down, but he wasn't out. And now, I had a target on my back. The following weeks were a blur of heightened awareness. I changed my routines, avoided places where I might run into Adrian, and even installed security cameras around my house. But the tension never eased. Every shadow, every unfamiliar car, every unexpected noise set my nerves on edge. One night, as I sat in my living room, sipping a glass of whiskey, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You took everything from me. Now it's my turn." My blood ran cold. It didn't need a name. I knew exactly who it was. The whiskey glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. The house felt smaller, darker, as if Adrian's presence had seeped into the walls. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to decide what to do. Call the police? Confront him? Or wait for whatever he had planned? The next day, I noticed a car parked across the street. A different one this time, but the feeling was the same. I wasn't alone. Adrian was watching, waiting. And then it hit me. This wasn't fear. This wasn't panic. This was the same fire I'd felt the night I walked into my bedroom and saw him with my wife. Adrian thought he could break me, just like he'd broken so many others. But he'd underestimated me once before, and he was about to learn that I wasn't the same man he'd tried to destroy. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And this time, I wouldn't wait for him to strike first.